It was clearly a big night for the president last night. What was your takeaway?
I mean, first of all, I love to be right. And I had been for so long like, the guy's actually really good and you're going to be shocked. So there was a moment where I was sitting there going like, if I'm wrong, this is going to be really embarrassing. So I was really happy. I thought he did a great job. There were some lines in there that were really good. His delivery was, I thought, really good. But there were things that stuck out to me. Like, you can't only love this country when you win, which he said before, but is a really good line. And the only Republican clapping, Mitt Romney, right? So there were so many times where we talked about things.
The Republican most likely to potentially endorse Joe Biden.
Right. And also the only really one of the very few Republicans who still believes in what we're supposed to be doing in this country, this larger democracy. So I thought that was really good. I also, when he said, if you don't want the money for your districts,
we'll take it on back.
Yeah, that was amazing. There were a lot of things where I was like looking at Mike Johnson and he couldn't clap like the lead pipes, right? Like taking the lead out of the water for children. Like
he couldn't clap for let's have every third grader in America reading and let's expand tutoring. I'm pretty sure everybody can give that one a round of applause, especially if you're about family values.
It really showed the place that Trumpism has put the Republican Party. And I thought that was really interesting.
Maya, I know ahead of the speech, you really wanted the president to urge people to understand how important it is to protect democracy. And there he was in the room, standing before Congress where the insurrection happened 3 years ago. Do you think he got that point home?
Oh, yeah. And I just want to say, Molly is always right because she supported me from there.
There you go. There you go.
So just saying.
Okay, good.
No, but Molly is totally right about what he delivered. But to this point, he started with democracy in such an interesting way, and it took me aback. Because he started with Ukraine, and I thought, wait, he's running for president. What's he doing?
Yeah.
And then it became very elegantly clear that he was starting with this theme of democracy in the context of his sub-theme, which was history. And it was history, not just history that we are in terms of our period, but what history are we going to make?
Because he's also underscoring, I may be older, but I'm wiser.
Well, and we'll come back to the end of his speech. But he did that, but he linked it and immediately made it not just a foreign policy issue, which is why I was surprised. I thought that bold move when most Americans don't vote on foreign policy. But he quickly brings it into January 6th and the insurrection, which is what sets up his point about you can't just love this country when you win, which is not only a differentiator, but it's also what's at stake in terms of democracy. And I will say, as someone who also said, I want to hear him say it. I want to hear him say that it's about our right to vote. I want to hear him say.
He sure did.
And I wanted to hear him say the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act, the Freedom to Vote Act, because the other point is the reason we have the big lies that are just old lies, they're not even new lies about voter fraud and, that great Seth Meyers setup before the State of the Union when he reminds us of all of Trump's indictments. But underneath them is all of this big lie trying to take an election. And he's reminding us of that in January 6th, but he's reminding us in a way that brings it back to all the fundamentals of what lawmaking is and what leadership is and what protecting democracy is, and that it's for all of us. And I can't, because when he looks at the Supreme Court, and the justices are sitting there, okay, I was like,
you didn't think you were going to get that out of Joe Biden?
I did not think I was going to get that, but when he said, yeah, the Supreme Court, you said, women are not without electoral power. No kidding, which was also a message to talk about. But it's what we all needed to hear, because these are fundamentals. It's the first fundamental right we've ever had taken from us in the history of this country. And that was what he made clear throughout. But he pulled it back to what does it do for us on an everyday living point? Well, how does it change our lives? You actually mentioned the one, Stephanie, that I was going to say, which was, he talked about our kids learning in school. He talked about the things that Democrats, frankly, have dropped the ball on. All Republicans have done is weaponize education and not made it about education for all of us. Made it about how education can be a weapon to divide us. And he brought us back to what government's supposed to do for us.
Shouldn't everybody read? Christine, he did talk a lot about the economy. How do you think he did?
You know, I think he met people at their kitchen table. And I think last year when he talked about airline fees and hidden fees and junk fees, that was in the speech last year. And it was sort of criticized as small ball. I mean, come on, people feel terrible about the economy. And he did it again, but trying to show, look, Wall Street's at record highs. He never mentioned Wall Street. But on the same day Wall Street hit record highs, he's talking about nickeled and dimed Americans and what his policies are going to do. You know, big picture and small picture. All these different fees, but also tax policy and tax fairness, as he calls it. So I think he reset the table, honestly, on both the economy and the overall, I think, agenda for a second term. I think he did well on the economy. I also think that people are starting to feel less terrible about the economy. I mean, the state of the economy is strong. The state of the American perception of the economy is skeptical at best.
Bingo.
Right? And so there's this big Grand Canyon that he has to kind of, navigate. It's not a needle to thread. It is a Grand Canyon between how people feel and what's really happening. And I think, yesterday he just reset the table for that conversation.
So he took us to the kitchen table and then he reset it. I really like that. I like that.
When he talked about Snickers bars, you go to the snack machine.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I feel like that was a huge part of this, like just making it really concrete for people.
Yeah, Republicans, besides saying that he was speaking too loud, they argued, how could he make this so partisan, so political? Wow, I think it was Michael Steele who said at the top of the show, Marjorie Taylor Greene was in full campaign gear. And the last time Donald Trump gave a State of the Union address, he literally gave a medal to Rush Limbaugh.
Right.
So given that those are the arguments against President Biden's speech that Republicans are giving, is that them conceding he got that one?
Well, I mean, let's be clear. It's not that he did something new here. He accepted the terms of the speech. Over the last decade, this speech has changed. It used to be when I was growing up, you sat there, it was like going to church, right? That's not what it's like right now. What it's like right now is some guy is going to get up and call you a liar. Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to get up and wear her MAGA hat. That is what the State of the Union is now. It is political performance. And I think that's really important to talk about because I think we have to linger a bit in how a lot of people were feeling before this speech.
Nervous.
Right? So nervous. We were feeling like, this is someone who's older, and also this is a rerun. Like, we've been here before, so simultaneously dread and boredom, okay? That's what we were going into this speech with.
Dread, boredom, lack of enthusiasm. Wow, Mary, you really made it set up for a great night.
Yeah, right? But I mean, that also gives him a pretty low bar to clear,
right,
which he did. And I think that performance was really important. He really used the foils of the Republican Party and just stepped up to them. And that was really important. You know, I feel like before this speech, I was thinking about this election kind of the way, like I was like, I really need to reset how I think about elections. I'm used to falling in love with candidates. You know, maybe I really need to think about this more like how the Wall Street Journal talks about marriage. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes,
you just need to make a decision and accept the tax benefit. Do you know what I'm saying?
Okay, but someone else spoke last night, and whether she had a high bar or a low bar, I think it's safe to say, and I'm not giving an overarching opinion, she did not clear it. It was the Republican response, Alabama Senator Katie Britt, and let's just share a bit of it.
The true, unvarnished state of our union begins and ends with this. Our families are hurting. Our country can do better.
I'm almost afraid to continue because Molly's going to set herself on fire. Obviously, her remarks were widely panned, but it was her fellow Alabama Senator, Tommy Tuberville, today, who said he was saying she did a good job, and he said she was picked as a housewife, not just a senator.
Yes.
Somebody who sees it from a different perspective. So first of all, let's just say this. In Katie Britt, there's nothing wrong with being a housewife. No. She's not a housewife. She is a U.S. senator. But how telling is this, that this is where Republicans want to weave us to? You know, let's go back to that kitchen where that mother is, where that woman is, where she should be flanked by her children, because that's a woman's place. Is that the message they were trying to send us last night?
I mean, they're a mess. Look, everything that's not Trump in this party is a mess. And
You think he's not?
I mean, he's a mess, too, but at least Trump is a thing. Whereas everything else is like not Trump in the Republican Party, but still Trumpy. So they didn't have a lot of great choices. Remember, they liked her because she was young and a woman and didn't seem too crazy. Right?
And beautiful.
Right. And you couldn't put Marjorie Taylor Greene there. I mean, you can't put Lauren Boebert there. There are not a ton of choices, and a lot of these Republicans are retiring.